I used to think love was enough to keep a family together, that if I worked hard, stayed kind, and loved my child with everything I had, the world would let me be. But not everyone wants peace, and certainly not Judith, my ex-mother-in-law. My name is Elena Morris, 32 years old. I'm a single mother to a 9-year-old boy named Mason, who is my whole world. After my divorce 2 years ago, I was granted full custody. I thought the hardest part was behind me, but I hadn't counted on Judith. She never liked me. To her, I was never good enough, not rich, not polished, not quiet when I should have been. Judith adored women who smiled and nodded beside powerful men. But me, I was just a third-grade teacher with tired eyes, messy hair, and a paycheck stretched to cover every meal, doctor visit, and field trip. I didn't have the time or the patience to play her games, but I never imagined she'd go this far. It was a Monday morning. I was making Mason's favorite breakfast, peanut butter toast and a glass of milk, when there was a knock at the door. I opened it to find a man in a beige suit and tie holding an envelope with red markings across the front. Court documents. I was being sued, not by my ex, not for any unpaid bill, but by Judith Morris herself, my ex-husband's mother, who was petitioning for full custody of Mason. Her reason: grandmother is concerned for the child's mental and physical well-being. She believes the mother is emotionally unstable and unfit to care for the child. I felt like the floor disappeared beneath me. My hands were trembling so badly I dropped Mason's milk glass to the floor. He looked at me, confused. "Are you okay, Mom?" I smiled through gritted teeth. "It's just paperwork, honey. Don't worry." But inside, I was spiraling. I had no criminal record, no history of abuse, no neglect. I worked full-time. I showed up to every parent-teacher conference, every dentist appointment. I loved Mason like my own breath. How could she make this up? I tried to reach the lawyer who handled my divorce, only to find out he'd moved firms with no funds for a top-tier attorney. I ended up hiring Mara Kimball, a young legal aide, inexperienced but driven. And most importantly, she believed me. 2 days later, Judith submitted her evidence to the court. Photos of me crying alone in my bathroom, taken without my knowledge while I was going through postpartum depression. Old therapy records from years ago when I sought help after Mason's birth. A written statement from Sheila, a former babysitter I had fired for showing up drunk, now claiming I frequently screamed and acted unstable around the child. I remember Sheila clearly, and I remember the day I told her not to come back, but apparently Judith had bought her silence. I started doubting everyone who had smiled at me in the past while quietly collecting stories, who told me, "You're such a good mom," but was secretly feeding my name into legal paperwork. Every night I pretended nothing was wrong. I tucked Mason into bed with a smile and kissed his forehead. But when I was alone, I lay awake shaking. I whispered into the dark, "No one's taking you from me, no one's still." I knew this wasn't a simple custody dispute. Judith was chair of the board at a private hospital. She had access to medical records, doctors who owed her favors, and the money to make anything look real on paper. She didn't want custody. She wanted me erased. I decided not to post anything online. No Facebook rants, no cryptic tweets. I went quiet, but I wasn't powerless. I began collecting everything: voicemails from Judith, text messages that implied bribery, even one secret recording from a conversation where she tried to settle things. "Judith, if you give Mason to me, I'll drop the legal stuff. I'll even help you pay off that apartment lease. Maybe help you go back to school." I nodded, smiled, and hit record. I didn't know what I'd do with it yet, but I knew I wasn't alone in this fight. Someone else had been listening, watching. Quiet but not clueless, Mason. I noticed him pausing outside doorways when I was on the phone, watching me when he thought I was asleep, but he didn't ask questions. He only whispered one thing to me one night as I held him tight. "I'll always choose you, Mom." I bit down on my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I thought I was the only one protecting him. I didn't know then that my son was already protecting me. And soon, in the most unexpected way, he would do something no adult had the courage to. Have you ever walked into a room and felt the silence thicken the air? The kind that doesn't come from peace, but from judgment that's already been passed. That's what school pickup became for me. That's what the grocery store turned into. That's what even Mason's soccer games started to feel like trials without courtrooms. People didn't need to ask. They'd already heard. I overheard two mothers whispering near the school gate. "It's sad. A kid needs stability. I heard she had to be evaluated. Mental health, something serious." They never said my name. They didn't have to. The smear campaign was working, quietly, efficiently, just like Judith had planned. Judith didn't come at me with fists. She used paperwork. She didn't yell. She whispered behind closed doors, then mailed the whispers with certified stamps. There was no public outburst, no screaming match, just a steady leak of credibility, drop by drop. And I was drowning in it. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation. Not because there was any solid evidence, but because there was enough suggestion of instability. That's all it takes sometimes. Not facts, just suggestion. I sat in a beige office with a woman who kept writing while barely looking up. She asked if I ever felt overwhelmed. She asked if I sometimes struggled with mood regulation. I wanted to laugh. Of course I felt overwhelmed. I was a single mom being sued by a woman who thought she could parent my child better with pearls and money. But I didn't laugh, I just answered, I'm tired, not unstable, and if being exhausted makes me unfit, then go ahead and put half the moms in America on trial. She didn't even smirk. She just wrote something in her notebook. A few days later, a letter came from Child Protective Services. Someone anonymously had filed a report. It claimed I'd left Mason home alone multiple times, that I'd been seen screaming at him on the porch, that our home was unsanitary. I froze. Then I got angry. I took photos of our spotless kitchen. I pulled security footage from the building showing Mason entering and leaving, with me every single time. It was all false, fabricated, planted, but none of that mattered. Because once suspicion walks through the front door, it lingers in every hallway. It watches you fold laundry. It sits beside you at the dinner table. Judith was rewriting the narrative. I wasn't a struggling single mother. I was an unstable woman clinging to a child for identity. And she wasn't an interfering grandmother. She was rescuing her grandson. Even Mason's pediatrician, who had always smiled and chatted with me, started tilting her head in that careful way. Mason seems a bit anxious lately. Has anything changed at home? My skin crawled. Not because of the question, but because I could see it in her eyes. She was no longer sure who I was. I confronted Judith just once. Outside the courthouse, she was standing on the steps, her coat buttoned neatly like she was heading to high tea. Not trying to destroy my life, I walked up to her and said quietly, "What are you really after, Judith? Because if it's control, you already have it. You've got the money, the lawyers, the narrative. Why do you still want my son?" She didn't even flinch. "This isn't about control, Elena. It's about correction. Mason is a brilliant child. He deserves structure, culture, access. And frankly," her eyes scanned me like a purchase she regretted. "You don't offer that." I felt something snap inside me. "You mean I don't offer you? I don't reflect the version of motherhood you can parade at charity galas." She smiled soft and smug. "I'm offering you a way out, quietly, gracefully, before this gets worse." I didn't respond. I didn't scream. I didn't threaten, because Judith was the kind of person who feeds off chaos. And silence to her was unbearable, so I walked away, but inside I was burning. That night, I tore through our apartment like I was preparing for war. I organized Mason's school files. I dug out every medical record, every note from teachers I copied, every voicemail Judith had left. Some of them were polite. Others, not so much. He told me he wants to stay with me more. Elena, maybe think about what that means. You're always so emotional. No wonder Mason acts anxious. Children mimic their mothers. I compiled them all into a single folder and gave it to Mara. She read through them and looked up at me with a quiet intensity. We might not just have a defense, we might have a case. But I wasn't thinking about lawsuits, I was thinking about survival. I was thinking about Mason, about the little boy who had to witness his mother being dragged through the mud all while trying to finish fourth-grade math and learn how to ride a bike with no training wheels. And somehow, he wasn't breaking. One night, I found him sitting in the hallway, tablet glowing in his hands. He wasn't playing games. He was recording his voice, practicing answers. I sat next to him and asked gently, "What are you doing, sweetheart?" He looked up and said, "They might ask me questions, right? The judge. The lady with the notebook. I just want to be ready." I stared at him. This tiny boy with a backbone made of quiet steel. "You don't have to prove anything, Mason. You're just a kid. I'm supposed to protect you." He shook his head. "You do every day, but maybe now I can protect you too." That night after he was asleep, I broke down for the first time in weeks. Not out of fear, but because I knew the tide was turning. Judith had underestimated him. She thought a 9-year-old couldn't see through lies. She forgot that children know love when they feel it, and they know when it's missing. And for the first time, I let myself believe she wasn't going to win. The courthouse smelled like old carpet and cold coffee. The kind of place where lives are quietly rearranged with a stroke of a pen. I wore my best black dress, nothing flashy, hair pinned back, minimal makeup. I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard, just composed. It's strange, isn't it, how a courtroom can turn motherhood into a performance. I clutched Mason's hand as we walked in. He looked calm, too calm for a 9-year-old about to sit across from the grandmother who'd tried to take him. We took our seats. Judith was already there, tailored blazer, pearl earrings, and a manila folder thicker than the Bible. Her lawyer, a slick man named Carlton, smiled at me like this was just another real estate negotiation. My attorney Mara whispered, "We don't need to out-yell them, we just need to hold the truth steady." I nodded, but my hands were cold. The judge entered a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and an expression that could cut through stone. She glanced at both sides. "We're here to determine whether custodial transfer is in the child's best interest. Let's begin." And just like that, it began. Carlton started by painting Judith as a pillar of stability. She's a hospital board chair, a philanthropic leader. She's hosted youth literacy programs and funded pediatric cancer drives. Then he pivoted to me. The cracks, the doubts. Ms. Morris has a history of postpartum depression. There are documented emotional fluctuations, unstable employment patterns, and reports. He looked directly at me of emotional outbursts in front of the child. He submitted evidence, pictures of me crying, statements from the old babysitter, anonymous complaints. I sat there still, I didn't flinch. I let the lies echo off the walls. Because lies eventually collapse under their own weight. You just have to outlast them. Then it was my turn. Mara stood calmly. "Your Honor, none of the claims brought forth have been corroborated. The medical documents are outdated. The testimony's questionable. My client has no criminal record, no prior incidents. Her son is well-fed, well-educated, and loved." She slid a folder across the table, neatly organized logs, emails from teachers, letters from Mason's pediatrician, and most importantly, a recording, the one from our living room. Judith's voice crystal clear. "If you just give him to me, I'll handle the legal stuff. You won't have to worry about rent or your reputation. Trust me, Elena. This is better for everyone." Judith's face paled. The judge lifted a brow. "Was this recording submitted with notice?" Mara nodded. "Filed last week, Your Honor. It reflects coercion and manipulation, not concern." Judith's lawyer scrambled, trying to object, but the damage was done. Still, the final part of the hearing loomed. The judge turned her gaze toward Mason. Would the minor be comfortable giving a statement? I felt my breath catch. This was it. Mason stood. He looked small, walking to the front, but when he climbed into the witness chair and adjusted the mic, something shifted. He wasn't a boy anymore. He was a truth no one could ignore. The judge leaned forward. "Mason, do you understand why you're here?" He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "You can speak freely. Whatever you feel, you say it in your own words." "Okay." Mason looked around at me, at Judith, then down at his lap, and from his coat pocket he pulled out a USB stick. Mara turned to me confused. So was I. The judge tilted her head. "What's that, Mason?" "It's something I recorded on my tablet." "Mom didn't know I did it, but I think it matters." He handed it to the bailiff, who plugged it into the courtroom system. The judge gave a nod. The room fell into absolute silence. Audio began to play Judith's voice again. "If you say your mom yelled at you, I'll buy you that drone. You want the one with the camera, right? Your mom doesn't have time for you like I do. With me, you'll have space, things, real chances." And then, Mason's voice, "But she tucks me in every night. She lets me make pancakes on Fridays." "I don't want things. I want her," Judith shouted. "Stop being a baby. She's weak. You'll understand when you're older." The audio cut off, and the silence was no longer heavy. It was devastating. Judith sat frozen. Her lawyer was motionless. Even the judge leaned back, exhaling slowly. Mason's voice, now live, broke the tension. "My mom isn't perfect. She gets tired. Sometimes we have cereal for dinner. But she never leaves me. She never lies to me. She shows up." He turned to the judge. "I don't want to live with someone who says love is a reward. I want to stay with the person who already loves me." I felt my chest break open. Tears streamed silently down my cheeks. But I didn't cry from fear anymore. I cried because my son might had shattered the silence, and in its place he'd built truth. The judge adjusted her glasses, her voice firm. "The court finds no grounds to remove custody. The motion is denied. This courtroom will enter an investigation into witness tampering and potential coercion by the petitioner." Judith gasped. It was over. Not with shouting, not with vengeance, but with the quiet, undeniable voice of a child. Telling the truth, no one else dared speak. After the recording played, the courtroom didn't erupt. There was no shouting, no angry rebuttal. There was only silence, heavy, dense, unmistakable. Judith didn't say a word. She didn't rise. She didn't even look at me, and that somehow was louder than anything else. Outside the courthouse, the air felt thinner. Mason gripped my hand tighter than usual. Not out of fear, but almost as if to say, "We did it, and I'm not letting go." I bent down to meet his eyes. "You were so brave today. You didn't just speak for yourself, baby. You reminded the world who I am. He smiled quiet and steady. I didn't want them to get it wrong. And somehow, with that one sentence, my son rewrote an entire war. But Judith wasn't done, not in the way snakes are never truly still, just waiting. Her lawyer filed an emergency appeal 2 days later, claimed Mason was pressured, coached, emotionally manipulated. She tried to spin it, said the USB recording was unethical, said it was edited, even tried to pin it on me, suggesting I had scripted the whole thing. But the judge wasn't blind, and neither were the people watching. Because something strange happens after a courtroom echo fades. People start listening again, Mara told me quietly. We may have won that day in court, but now the real unraveling begins. We didn't have to push. The walls began to crack on their own. The school counselor who had once pulled me aside to discuss Mason's anxiety called me a week later. Her voice was gentler, hesitant. We reviewed some conversations Mason had during his check-ins, and there's something I need to apologize for. Apparently, Mason had once told her that his grandmother offered to trade love for gifts, but they brushed it off. Now, with the recording out, they were listening. Then came the pediatrician. She had always been polite but firm until now. Ms. Morris, she said I should have trusted my instincts. Your son is healthy, grounded, loved. You've done an incredible job. Her tone wasn't clinical anymore, it was human. Even the babysitter, Sheila, the one who testified against me, sent an email. It was short, a few lines. I lied. She paid me. I was desperate. I'm sorry, Mara said. We could pursue charges, but I didn't answer right away. Because here's the thing, people don't understand about being publicly torn down. Sometimes you don't want revenge, you just want your life back. Judith tried to do damage control. She appeared at a fundraiser, all diamonds and damage denial. Told anyone who would listen that the judge was biased, that Mason had been brainwashed. But every time she spoke, someone remembered that voice in the recording, that bitter sentence, stop being a baby. She's weak. You'll understand when you're older. And just like that, her foundation began to crack. 3 weeks later, I was sitting at the kitchen table when I got the letter. It was from Judith's lawyer, a withdrawal. The appeal had been dropped. The custody case closed. Permanently. There was no apology, no admission, just silence. But this time, the silence didn't feel threatening. It felt like peace. Mason came home that afternoon with a drawing. It was him, me and our cat, standing in front of our apartment. Underneath, he wrote, "Family is not who takes you. It's who stays when things get hard." I kept that drawing taped to our fridge for weeks. Still do. Judith hasn't contacted us since. Not a message, not a gift, not a whisper. Some might call it defeat. But to me, it was finally respect. For months after the court date, I kept expecting the noise to come back. The rumors, the side glances, the subtle humiliations. But instead, people stopped whispering. They started looking again. Looking at me, not through me. One of the school moms who once avoided me came over after drop-off. She handed me a coffee and said simply, "You're a damn good mom." That one sentence meant more than any verdict ever could. Here's the truth. Judith never saw coming. You can manufacture doubt. You can plant rumors. You can even pay people to lie. But you cannot buy the kind of truth a child speaks when he's defending the only home he's ever trusted. And you cannot bury a mother's love under court documents and cocktail parties. Some battles aren't won with swords, they're won with patience, with quiet dignity, with a 9-year-old's voice trembling but unshakable. And in the end, Judith didn't lose because I out-argued her. She lost because Mason stopped being afraid. And when a child speaks the truth, the world listens. It's strange what silence feels like after war. At first, it doesn't feel like peace. It feels like waiting. Waiting for the next email, the next knock on the door, the next whisper to reach the wrong ears. But weeks passed, then months, and the silence remained. Not tense, not weaponized, just quiet, the kind of quiet that follows justice. I started breathing again in pieces. First during sleep, uninterrupted, dreamless, deep. Then in the mornings when Mason would wake me up with a plastic lightsaber to the ribs and a giggle that reminded me the worst was behind us. We didn't talk much about the court case, not because we were ignoring it, but because we didn't need to. He knew, and I knew. Some truths don't need retelling. They just need to be lived, freely. I returned to teaching my students my little whirlwind of crayons, and questions didn't ask about the hearing. But one day, one of them tugged my sleeve and said, "Miss Morris, my mom says you're the mom with the brave kid." I blinked, then smiled. Yeah, he's the bravest person I know. Judith disappeared from our lives like dust off a shelf. No phone calls, no Christmas cards, no court letters. Her name became something that no longer echoed, just faded. But in some strange way, I wasn't angry, I wasn't bitter, because people like her, they feed on audience, And when you stop clapping, stop crying, stop responding, they shrink. She didn't just lose Mason, she lost control, and that for her was a worse sentence than any verdict. Mason asked me once, "Do you think she loved me, Mom?" I paused, because how do you answer that? How do you explain conditional affection to a boy who gave unconditional truth? So I said, "I think she loved what you could be for her. But real love, it lets you be who you are." He thought for a moment, then nodded. "Then I'm glad I'm with the real kind." That sentence stayed with me. I'd spent so long defending my ability to mother, I forgot to believe in my right to be one. But Mason never questioned it. Not once. Even when the world did. Even when papers said otherwise. Even when a courtroom tried to put my worth into legal language. He knew. He reminded them, and me. One day after school, he brought home a permission slip for a writing contest. The prompt. "A moment that changed your life." He asked if he could write about the courtroom. I said yes if he wanted to. He sat by the window, legs crossed, scribbling for an hour straight. No video games, no snacks. Just him and the truth again. That Friday, he turned it in. 2 weeks later, the school called. His piece had been selected not just for the local contest, but to be read aloud at a district assembly. The principal asked if I wanted to attend. I nearly laughed. I wouldn't miss it for the world. When Mason stepped on stage, he didn't look nervous. He looked ready. He read clearly, slowly, like each word was an anchor in his memory I once had to speak in a courtroom. People say it's scary, and it is. But what's scarier is letting someone lie about your mom when you know better. My mom didn't tell me to speak. She didn't even know I had the recording. But I remembered how she looked when she thought no one was watching, strong, even when she was tired, brave even when she was scared. I wanted the judge to see her the way I do. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. I sat in the back row, hand over my mouth, heart beating so hard it shook my ribs. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was his own witness, his own warrior, and I was just lucky enough to raise him. Afterward, a few parents came up to me. Some I knew, some I didn't. They said things like, "You must be proud. That took real courage. He got that from somewhere." But what none of them realized was I didn't give Mason that courage. He gave it to me. Now, when people ask me what happened with Judith, I don't give them the courtroom story. I tell them the real story. That once a 9-year-old boy looked at a room full of adults, lawyers, judges, power suits, and told the truth. So purely, so clearly, it burned every lie to the ground. That's the power of love without performance, of truth without screaming, of a child who knew the difference between being taken care of and being taken. I didn't win custody because I fought harder. I won because I stood still long enough for my son to stand up. And in the end, he didn't just save our family. He saved me from ever doubting who I was again.